I was elbow-deep in goat feed when I first heard the clack of heels coming up my gravel driveway. I turned, wiping my hands on my jeans, just in time to see her Stacy Templeton marching toward me with a manila folder clutched like it was a holy book. Stacy, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else than near my barn. "Xander Orlin," she said, tight-lipped. "We need to talk. Immediately." "Morning to you too, Stacy," I said. "Hope the board's still breathing after that last budget disaster." She ignored the jab and opened the folder with a dramatic flick. "You are in violation of Section 5, Subsection B of the Evergreen Bluffs HOA covenants. No livestock permitted on residential lots. That includes goats, chickens, and whatever that thing is." She pointed at my pig, Cupcake, who inked in protest. I leaned against the fence, crossing my arms. "Stacy, my property's over 2 acres. Bought it before this HOA was even formed. And the city zoning allows agricultural use." She sniffed. "Well, Evergreen Bluffs doesn't. As of last month, we updated our bylaws. You had 30 days to comply." I raised an eyebrow. "And when exactly did you notify me?" She blinked. "It was posted in the monthly newsletter. The one you only email to your board friends?" I asked. "I never got one." Stacy's smile was tight as piano wire. "Then that's your problem. You have 72 hours to remove the animals or face daily fines, $100 per animal." I could feel my blood pressure rising. I'd moved here for peace, not HOA tyranny. My goats were therapy animals. My daughter Zara had been through hell after her mom died. These animals had pulled her out of it. "You're not getting rid of them," I said flatly. "Then I hope you're ready to write some very large checks," she said, turning on her heel. I watched her stomp off like she just won a war. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd already started digging into the HOA's records after they tried to fine my neighbor for parking his RV in his own driveway. And what I'd found? Well, it was about to blow Evergreen Bluffs wide open. That same afternoon, I locked the barn, grabbed the flash drive from my desk drawer, and drove into town. The county clerk's building had that familiar smell of old paper and industrial cleaner, and the clerk, an older woman with owl glasses and a quiet sense of humor, nodded when she saw me approach. "Back again, Mr. Orlin? Just need to double-check something in the Evergreen Bluffs Incorporation packet," I said. She slid the binder across the counter without a word. I flipped through it quickly, stopping at the page I'd flagged last time. There it was, black and white, notarized and dated. Evergreen Bluffs HOA's jurisdiction explicitly excluded any properties zoned agricultural under City Ordinance 42C. My plot, along with 3 others on the east side, had that designation grandfathered in from the mid-'80s. I took a high residential scan, thanked her, and headed to the city planning office 2 blocks down. The zoning manager, a guy named Curtis, recognized me from the community meetings. "I was hoping you'd come in," he said, tapping a folder on his desk. "We've been getting calls from your HOA trying to push a zoning overlay. They're claiming your animals are a public nuisance and asking us to reclassify your parcel." I leaned forward. "Can they do that?" Curtis shrugged. "They can ask, but it'd take a council vote, and even then you'd be entitled to contest it. Given the zoning history, they've got no legal standing. It's a political move, not a legal one." "Are they targeting anyone else?" He opened the folder and scanned a list. 2 other properties, both on the old ranch lots. They've filed anonymous complaints and attached photos. "Looks like the HOA's trying to build a case for nuisance abatement." "Photos?" I asked. Curtis turned the monitor so I could see. Grainy pictures of my goat enclosure, someone clearly taking them from behind the trees bordering my property. One even showed Zara feeding the animals, completely unaware of the camera. I clenched my jaw. "That's illegal surveillance." Curtis nodded. "If these were taken from your property line or worse, inside, it's trespassing." I talked to the sheriff. By the time I reached the station, the sun was dipping low. Sheriff Dunley, a straight shooter who once fined the mayor's son for littering, listened carefully as I laid out the documents, photos, and zoning history. I handed him the flash drive and the scanned incorporation pages. "These photos were sent to city officials anonymously," I said. But we both know who's behind it. Dunley narrowed his eyes. If they crossed onto your land to get these, that's criminal trespass. And if they sent them to influence a zoning change, we're looking at falsifying evidence to a government agency. That's a felony. Can you investigate the board? He nodded. I'll open a case, but you'll need to give me access to your security footage. Anything that shows them near your property line, especially if they stepped over it. I've got cameras on the east and north fence lines. Motion triggered. I'll pull the last 2 weeks. Do it. And Xander, keep this quiet for now. I want to catch them in the act if they try anything else. Back at home, I downloaded the security footage. Sure enough, 3 nights ago at 2:17 a.m., a figure crept along the east fence. The motion light caught her just enough, tall, blazer, hair in a bun. Stacy. She stood just inside the property line, lifted a phone, snapped several photos, then ducked back into the trees. 30 seconds later, another person shorter, stockier, joined her. Jerry, the HOA treasurer. They whispered, pointed, and left. I burned the footage onto a second flash drive and dropped it off at the sheriff's office first thing the next morning. That afternoon, I called a neighborhood meeting. We gathered in my backyard, about 30 residents, including the 2 other homeowners with livestock. I passed out copies of the zoning documents and a simple breakdown of how the HOA had no authority over our agricultural properties. Murmurs spread. People were angry, confused. Then I laid it out. Stacy and Jerry trespassed on my land to take illegal photos. Sent them to the city to try and force a zoning change. That's criminal. Sheriff's investigating it now. A woman near the back, Mrs. Lambert, who ran the daycare down the street, stood up. They tried to fine me for having more than 2 kids in my home, she said. Claimed it was a business violation. But I checked, home daycares are allowed under city code. They just didn't like the traffic. A man next to her raised a hand. They fined me for repainting my mailbox. Said the color wasn't approved. It was the same black I've had for 10 years. It snowballed. One by one, residents shared stories, fabricated violations, threats of liens, selective enforcement. A pattern of control, not governance. I waited until the noise calmed. I filed a petition for a special vote to remove the entire board, I said. We need 30% of homeowners to sign. I've got 15 already. If you've had enough, now's the time. Hands shot up. Over the next 2 days, the signatures poured in. By Friday, I submitted the petition to the HOA's administrative arm, an outside management firm that, while complicit in some of the nonsense, still had to follow protocol once a quorum was triggered. The emergency vote was set for 2 weeks later. That weekend, I noticed a black sedan parked across from my house each night. Same car, same spot. I took photos, noted the plates. The sheriff confirmed it was registered to a private security contractor, one that happened to be hired by the HOA the previous year for community patrols. Keep documenting, Dunley advised. They're nervous. The night before the vote, someone egged my barn. Broke 2 windows on the coop. But they tripped a new motion sensor I'd hidden beneath the trough. The camera caught Jerry, plain as day, hoodie half off, mask dangling from his neck. That was the final nail. The morning of the vote, the sheriff's office executed a warrant for trespassing and criminal mischief. Jerry was arrested in his driveway. Stacy tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the footage said otherwise. At the vote, 74% of homeowners turned out. By sunset, the entire board was removed. The management firm dissolved their contract within days, citing irreconcilable ethical violations. A temporary committee was formed made up of volunteers from across the neighborhood, including the other 2 livestock owners and Mrs. Lambert. I was asked to chair the Reform Council, but I declined. I'd done my part. I just wanted to feed my goats in peace. The new committee audited the HOA's finances and found over $45,000 in miscellaneous expenditures with no receipts. They turned it over to the DA. Stacy skipped town 2 weeks later. The HOA bylaws were revised with community oversight. Agricultural parcels were formally exempted. Home businesses, as long as compliant with city code, were protected. Fines required photographic evidence and an appeals process. And the goats? They got a new shelter donated by neighbors who insisted I deserved something for standing up when no one else could. Zara painted a mural on the side of it, 3 goats, a pig, and a pair of boots walking away into the sunrise. We kept the cameras up, but the threats stopped. Evergreen Bluffs didn't just clean house. It woke up. The dust hadn't even settled from the vote before things started surfacing. I was cleaning out the old shed at the edge of my property, clearing space for a new rainwater system, when I heard footsteps crunch over the mulch I'd laid last spring. I turned to see Alan Mendoza, the former board's secretary, standing just outside the open gate. He looked haggard, shirt untucked, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in days. "I didn't know who else to talk to," he said. "I need to tell you something." I gestured him inside. He glanced around nervously before following me into the shed. I closed the door behind us. Sunlight filtered through the slats, catching dust in the air. "I didn't know what they were doing," he started, voice low. "At first it was just meetings about landscaping rules, paint colors. Then Stacy started pushing these private sessions, no minutes, no votes. Just her, Jerry, and Randy." "Randy?" I asked. "Vice President," Alan said. "He quit right before the vote. Claimed it was health reasons, but I think he saw what was coming." "Why come to me now?" Alan pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "These are copies of every bank transfer, internal email, and invoice I could find. There's stuff here that doesn't add up. Vendor payments going to LLCs that don't exist. A $10,000 security enhancement paid to a company registered to Jerry's cousin. And then there's this." He thumbed through a folder he'd brought and handed me a printed email chain. At the top was a subject line, "Zoning Leverage Strategy Discussion." I read through it. The board had been discussing ways to pressure property owners into selling off their back lots, especially those with larger parcels near the wooded East End. They planned to quietly push for rezoning, then fine the owners into submission until they either gave up or sold cheap. One message from Stacy laid it out plainly: if we can shift the East End to residential only, we can open the door to developers. Target the holdouts first. Make it hard for them to stay. I lowered the page. "So all of this, me, the goats, the other AG lots, it was about pushing people off the land." Alan nodded. "They had a buyer lined up. Some real estate fund out of state. Stacy was going to get a consulting position once the deal went through." I didn't say anything. I just took a long breath and looked out the shed's narrow window. My daughter was in the yard, brushing clover, the smallest goat. She had no idea someone had tried to uproot her home for money. "I shouldn't have stayed quiet," Alan said. "You didn't know," I replied. "But now you're doing the right thing." That night, I drove to the county prosecutor's office and handed over everything: flash drive, printed emails, zoning maps, even the meeting notes I'd kept from the reform committee discussions. I sat down with an investigator named Talia Nguyen, who listened intently and didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back slowly. "This is more than HOA mismanagement. If we can verify these shell payments and prove intent to defraud homeowners or manipulate zoning for private gain, we're looking at criminal conspiracy, possibly wire fraud. And if the developer was in on it..." She didn't finish the sentence. She just tapped her pen against the folder and stood. "I need to pull property tax records and subpoena their financials. We'll also need statements from anyone else they targeted." By the end of the week, subpoenas had been issued. The sheriff's office served them quietly, and within days, investigators were combing through the HOA's financial accounts. The city council called an emergency session to freeze pending zoning changes in the neighborhood. That's when the media caught wind. The local paper ran a front-page piece: "Evergreen Bluffs HOA under criminal investigation for land grab scheme." Below the headline was a photo of my barn, goats in the background, and a caption that read, "Zoning Fight Uncovers Deeper Corruption." Reporters started showing up outside the neighborhood. A few tried to knock on my door, but I waved them off. This wasn't about publicity. It was about making things right. Things escalated quickly after that. Investigators traced nearly $50,000 in HOA funds to a Wyoming-based LLC registered under an alias tied to Jerry's cousin. Another $30,000 was funneled into a consulting service Stacy had created 6 months earlier. It wasn't even a real office, just a P.O. box in a strip mall. What shocked everyone most was the discovery of a non-disclosure agreement Stacy had quietly pushed on the board members during one of those undocumented sessions. It included a clause that barred them from disclosing sensitive development strategy under threat of lawsuit. Alan had never signed it, which is why he came forward. The DA announced formal charges against Stacy and Jerry: conspiracy to commit fraud, misappropriation of funds, attempted zoning manipulation, and criminal trespass. Randy was named as a cooperating witness. The real estate fund pulled out of the area entirely. The community, meanwhile, was undergoing something I hadn't expected: healing. With the old board gone, the reform committee brought in a neutral third-party mediator to help rewrite the bylaws from the ground up. They opened every meeting to the public, required all expenditures to be published monthly, and banned any enforcement decisions without a recorded vote. I declined a seat again, but I did agree to help draft a homeowners' rights document. It guaranteed that no rule could contradict city or state law and that any proposed fines had to be reviewed by a rotating council of elected residents before being issued. One of the most active voices on the committee turned out to be Mrs. Lambert. She spearheaded the push for a neighborhood ombudsman, someone residents could go to if they felt they were being unfairly targeted. The position was filled by a retired judge who lived 2 streets over. A few weeks later, I got a letter handwritten, no return address. Inside was a short note: "You were the first to say no. I should have joined you sooner. Thank you for protecting what matters." There was no signature, but I recognized Alan's handwriting. Life didn't go back to normal. It went forward to something better. Neighbors I'd barely known before started waving when they passed. A few offered to help with repairs on the barn. One retired carpenter even built a new gate for the back pasture, just because he said he liked the sound of goats when he worked in his garden. Zara made a new friend from 2 streets over, a girl named Maya who'd been pulled out of school the same year her father lost his job. They bonded over the animals and spent hours helping me clean, feed, and repair fencing. Sometimes they sang while they worked. One afternoon, Curtis from the city planning office dropped by with a thick envelope. "I thought you'd want a copy of this," he said, handing it over. "The council just passed a new Zoning Protections Act. AG lots like yours are now permanently shielded from residential overlay without a supermajority vote and homeowner consent." I opened the packet. It was official. Certified. Unchallengeable. "You did this," he added. "You and the people who stood up with you." "No," I said. "We all did it. Together." Curtis looked out at the goats grazing under the setting sun. "You know, most people just grumble and write checks. You made them face consequences." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, as a cool breeze rolled over the fields and the porch light flickered on, I sat back and watched Zara teach Maya how to guide Clover through a simple obstacle course they'd built from old tires and a plank of wood. Their laughter carried across the yard. I thought about what nearly happened, what almost got taken away. And I realized something simple but solid. The HOA had power because people let them have it. When we stopped letting them, they crumbled. All it took was one person to say, "Not here. Not now. Not again." And then another. And another. That's how you rebuild a neighborhood. From the ground up. The first court hearing was held in a packed county auditorium, moved from the courthouse after the judge declared the case had drawn unusual public interest. The state had filed formal charges against the former HOA board members and the prosecutor Talia Nguyen, who had been digging deep since Alan's whistleblow was ready to lay it all bare. I sat in the second row behind the city zoning director and a few neighbors who'd become reliable allies. Zara stayed home. She'd seen enough tension for 1 year, but I kept a photo of her and Clover in my pocket, just in case I needed reminding why I was doing this. The judge, a stern-faced man with a clipped tone, called the session to order. Stacy stood up at the defense table in a gray blazer, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they charged by the syllable. Jerry wasn't there. He was in federal custody, facing separate charges for financial fraud tied to another HOA in a nearby county. Apparently, Evergreen Bluffs hadn't even been his only racket. Talia stepped forward with a stack of documents and a precise calm that cut the room's tension like a razor. Your Honor, we are prepared to prove that the defendants knowingly altered and enforced false bylaws, engaged in coordinated trespassing, and attempted to manipulate zoning ordinances for personal gain. Furthermore, we will show that these actions were part of a larger effort to pressure targeted homeowners into selling land to investors connected to the defendants through shell companies. One of Stacy's lawyers tried to object, but the judge waved him off with barely a glance. Talia turned to the room. We will begin with the defendant's emails, followed by HOA financial records, then testimony from city officials and affected homeowners. For the next 2 hours, she dismantled the defense like she was disassembling a faulty engine. Every piece of evidence fit emails, bank transfers, invoices from non-existent vendors, forged signatures on HOA forms authorizing security patrols that had never been disclosed to the community. Then came the zoning manipulation. Curtis from the planning office explained how the HOA had submitted anonymous complaints, then attempted to present them as evidence of a growing nuisance, hoping it would justify a zoning change. But the complaints had all come from the same IP address. Jerry's laptop. The judge called a recess before the witness testimonies began. Outside, on the courthouse steps, small clusters of residents stood in silent circles, shaking their heads. None of us needed to say anything. The lies were unraveling fast, and the people who'd built them were sinking with every thread pulled loose. Back inside, I was the third witness called. Talia walked me through the events: the illegal surveillance, the doctored bylaws, the trespassing, and vandalism. Then she pulled up the footage from the night Jerry crossed onto my property. Did you give him permission to enter your land that night? She asked. No. Did you ever authorize the HOA board to take photographs of your daughter or your animals? Absolutely not. Were you told that your property was exempt from HOA control under a grandfathered zoning classification? Yes. I confirmed that with the city before any of this started. She nodded once, then turned toward the defense table. Do you recognize the defendant, Ms. Templeton? I do. What was her last communication to you prior to these events? She told me I had 72 hours to remove my animals or face daily fines. When I questioned her authority, she walked away without offering any proof of the bylaw she claimed I was breaking. Talia paused for a moment. Then she asked a single question that hung in the air like a dropped match. In your view, Mr. Orlin, what was the real motive for the HOA's actions? I looked at Stacy, who was staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable. They wanted us out. Me, the other property owners, anyone who didn't fit their development plan. It was about money, and they didn't care what they had to break to get it. The judge asked a few clarifying questions, then dismissed me. I stepped down and took my seat as Talia brought up the final piece of evidence: a series of wire transfers from the HOA account to an LLC in Nevada. The LLC's manager? Stacy's cousin, who coincidentally worked for the same development firm that had been circling Evergreen Bluffs. The courtroom went still. Stacy's attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she didn't respond. Her face had lost all its polish. The trial wrapped after 5 days. The jury took less than 4 hours to return a verdict. Stacy was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy to defraud, misuse of public funds, criminal trespass, and obstruction of a government process. Jerry's charges had already been escalated to the federal level. The other board members, who had resigned before the investigation, received suspended sentences in exchange for testimony and full cooperation. The judge's sentence was firm but not vengeful. Stacy received 18 months in county custody, followed by 5 years probation and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the homeowners, totaling over $40,000. After the verdict, I walked out into the sun and didn't feel like I was carrying anything on my shoulders for the first time in months. The neighborhood changed not just in rules but in spirit. The community started meeting twice a month in the local library, not to enforce codes but to plan events, share resources, and actually talk. The goats became something of a symbol around here. Kids would ride their bikes past the fence and wave at Zara and Clover. Someone even painted a mural of farm animals on the side of the new community bulletin board. The bylaws were overhauled by a panel of residents, legal experts, and a representative from the city. They removed over 80% of the original restrictions, leaving only the essentials: no illegal dumping, no abandoned vehicles, and no harassment. Everything else was tossed out. We even got a new name. A month after the trial, the neighborhood voted to dissolve the Evergreen Bluffs HOA entirely and transition to a voluntary neighborhood association with zero enforcement power. The new name? Willow Field Commons. It wasn't fancy, but it meant something to us. Zara started an after-school program with Maya and 2 other kids. They taught basic animal care and let younger kids help with feeding and brushing. The school district sent a counselor out to observe the program, and now they're exploring a pilot partnership to offer it as a credited elective for middle schoolers. One afternoon, while checking the fence line, I found a weathered envelope taped to the north post. Inside was a single note in unfamiliar handwriting. "Thanks for holding the line. You reminded us that land means something." No name, just those words. I didn't need to know who wrote it. I already understood. Justice hadn't been some grand slam or fireworks finale. It had been a series of decisions, one after another, made by people who finally said enough. And in the end, the ground we stood on, our homes, our yards, our lives, was ours again. Not because we asked for permission, because we stood up and took it back.